At the end of it, they wouldn't let them paint the walls, fix a urinal, nothing. They just, what they did is literally froze them out of their own terminal in order for them to go, because they went kicking and screaming to the Port Authority. Now the Capital Greyhound is not Capital Greyhound Lines. Is on how it got its name. It is on the site of the old Capitol Theater in New York City. Now it wasn't that long ago, of course, that I remembered my old Dog and Target 743 sitting in there. Now here's an old Central Greyhound. Now this, if you'll notice, has the gold stripe on the nose. They initially came out that way. They soon were replaced, though, by the white nose. Now, if you notice, they all carried a Greyhound medallion, for the most part, on the center of the windshield. So did the 740, so did the Silversides and the scenic cruisers. Where did they all vanish to? Here they are all sitting on the reserve line later on in life. These are Pepsi cars. It was a beautiful, oh God, it was a beautiful creation. Pennsylvania 3846. I was pretty darn excited over the Brills. I liked them as well. I never got to see any of these. This is a slide that's just about gone from the oops, gracious. That's just about faded away. Edelweiss beer. But here in the same context is a slide that is actually older than the one you just saw, but it was shot on Kodachrome. Now here's one of the early Brills. IC-37. See the teardrop headlights? Vertical grille. Yeah, the close of the war, like I said, was a very exciting period at Greyhound. Here's some old Northland aero coaches, early aero coaches before the P-37, which you can see the Dog and Target. What very few people realize is those wings on that RAF squadron emblem, those are gold, those are not blue. And that's the aero coach I remember, although I never saw an overland Greyhound one. I did like the 3700 cars. This is Pennsylvania Greyhound 4553 and PDA 3702 4557. I did like them. There's no question of that. Central Greyhound 528. Again, another 3702. Pennsy 4553 again. That's at the old New York garage, not the Long Island City garage. The Long Island City garage was the garage I liked the best. Here's a pair of them sitting down in Washington, D.C. And at the close of the war, this Northland Greyhound little 2501 was still bopping around the countryside up in that neck of the world. This little 2501 shows the gold wings on the bus very well. Now, this game is a surprise to me because you got to remember, in my neck of the world, Greyhound didn't operate any transit-type buses. And when I learned that they were operated all around America in several Greyhound divisions, I was really flabbergasted. This is a TDM 5103 9414 of Pacific Greyhound Lines out in San Francisco. One of the largest suburban operators, of course, was Great Lakes Greyhound. Here's a rare beast down in Washington. An Eastern Greyhound Lines Fleet 5649, GM TDM 5108. 4509 with the enlarged windows, operating out of Cleveland, C-54-546. Another Cleveland 4509, TDM 4509, C544. There's been lots of odd stuff on Greyhound out through the years. Here's Mercedes with Greyhound dogs on them when they bought the Washington sightseeing tours in D.C. Of course, some of the rarest of the rare were the Richmond Greyhound 2 Macks. They would eventually end up in San Francisco. They're C49s, not C50s as previously reported. Another beautiful General Motors TDM 5108 with scenic cruiser dogs on it, no less. Greyhound would operate transits right up into the Fishbowl era. Another Pacific car in San Francisco making a swing into the old terminal. And yes, Virginia, there really were Pepsi Fishbowls. Here's one in San Francisco, big as life. But to get back in perspective, this was the car that was holding down the line. This is the baby. This is the Greyhound Silverside. And just about everywhere you went, she was the car that you were 99.9% sure of running into. As far as I was concerned, I wasn't a Silverside hater, but never, like I said, a Silverside lover. The thing is that it gave a little boredom, you know. The old Port Allegheny Greyhound post house here. Now here's a nice comparison shot. See, that's the 4101 on the other side. Now the bumpers were the same, so that would be hard to tell. But it doesn't have any air vent underneath the driver by the driver's feet. Where the 3751 here on the left-hand side, she does. That's one dead giveaway for a 4101 versus a 3751. The other giveaway is the air conditioning unit is behind the front wheel on a 4101 as shown here, and naturally on the 3751 it's behind the front baggage bay. And again, there's the air vent up there by the driver's feet. So you've got three Silversides you have to learn in history. The 33-footer, then the 3751, and the 4101. This slide is from the first roll of color slides I ever took in my life. My gracious, was I proud. Caught that down in Providence, Rhode Island, and boy was it cold that day, I want to tell you. Now, even back in those days, I took a representative shot of the rear of a bus. And that was important. I recognized it way back when. Again, now here's the little fella. This is the 33-footer. And the old rubber bumper was taken off, so that could throw you for a loop. But you can see that elongated first passenger window there. See it? That's the 3700. And then now something else came on the scene here that got my attention, and I fell immediately in love with. It was sort of designed to protest the IC-41. It even looked similar to it with the wraparound windshield and whatnot. Basically, it's considered the last of the Art Deco stylized buses, and that's the GM PD-4103, one of which I would own and operate myself one day. And here's a Richmond Greyhound Lines car. Now, the 4103 was devised, of course, when the Korean conflict came about. And here's Richmond 2155. As you can see, the aluminum was stripped from the buses. Aluminum was very hard to come by. Note the old style Amoco gas station sign over there, too. So the latter part of the series, they were made, as you can see, with no silver siding whatsoever on them. If we ever had any 4103s that didn't have silver siding at New England Greyhound lines, well, I never saw them. All I ever remember is our cars being full silver-sided and with the piece on the clearance lights as well. It was a pretty little car. There's no question of that. Here's one with air conditioning. Eastern Greyhound Lines 5110. Here's a rare pup with the oversized silver siding lettering on it. This is down in Florida. Southern Greyhound Lines. Well, we'll get into that in a minute. It used to be Florida Greyhound once upon a time. So at least between Washington and New York, or maybe New York and Richmond, you could find the 4103s working right alongside the 3702s. Again, here's a car without silver siding. Silver siding was so hard to come by that here's E4031 when she was hit and she had to be reskinned, and they had no silver siding available for a Silverside. So that's a rare little girl right there, I want to tell you. Here's an old Pacific car, K2066, working out at Tar Hole with a snowbank almost as tall as she is. Well, of course, 1954 came along and my brain was melted down one day when I saw something like this pulling into the plaza at Bridgeport. I said, what in the world is that? It was the most incredible coach ever created, one of the breakthrough landmark buses. None other than the mighty Greyhound, well, not Greyhound, but General Motors 4104 in a Greyhound livery. Although unique to the Greyhound 4104s was that plastic dog on the nose, just like the Silverside. Try and find one today. Here's Pennsylvania Greyhound 5416. Richmond Greyhound 2165. Now, something horrible was happening when these cars were coming out, and that's the Greyhound Corporation was being formed. New England Greyhound, Capital, all the neat little operating Greyhound companies that we'd known through history were disappearing. There were going to be an Eastern Greyhound, a Southern Greyhound, a Western Greyhound, and a Central Greyhound. And I, as well as the rest of my brother Greyhound lovers of the land, ranted and raved, lamented, beat our chest, but nonetheless, the Greyhound Corporation was created. Little did we know that at that time that was the beginning of the end. We knew we were really in trouble when Southeastern Greyhound had to buy 4104s. Of course, there wasn't a whole heck of a lot left of them to buy at this stage in history. Almost everybody was put out of business by GM. There were several liveries throughout their history with Greyhound, including up to the Pepsi. They got the Pepsi scheme. However, from the 4104 came the really big gun, the incredible Greyhound Silverside. And this is a 001 P-5446 Pennsylvania Greyhound Lines. Atlantic Greyhound 2201. Of course, I don't know whether you're aware of it or not, but IBC, here at IBC, we have a history book on the Greyhound Scenic Cruiser, listing every single one of the cars that Greyhound ever operated. General Motors would dub her the model PD-4501. And Greyhound would dub her the thing that saved our butts. People were actually leaving their car home to ride the Greyhound Scenic Cruiser someplace. Only a little over, let's see, 1,001 of them were made, I believe. They would actually end up their life in commuter service in California. Some of the combo cars actually made the Pepsi paint scheme, though. This is a Scotch light, how the Scotch light was applied to the Scenic Cruiser when she went by you at night. Here's a Pepsi job from IBC or Rich Sullivan. They made it. They made it right up to that era. First one ever sold to a bus operator outside of Greyhound would be to Michaud Bus Lines in Salem, Massachusetts. Boy, they thought that was a cat's meow when they got that little puppy, I want to tell you. Oh, mio mio Gio. Called it the Yankee Traveler. A month later, they weren't calling it no Yankee Traveler. They were calling it something, all right. And along came the 4106 after that. This one shown here in southern Kansas Greyhound lines, or by now as they were known as KG lines. The 06, again, would wear several liveries throughout her existence. But that's what she looked like when she first came out and when she was delivered. The very first series of them. Much like the 04. Here's some early ones I shot in the 60s down in Miami. I was pretty pleased at this car. It had a little body sculpting in the rear. Again, how she was first delivered. Not a whole heck of a lot of them stayed like that very long, though. Here's a southern car in the gold paint. I always thought the gold painted cars looked pretty neat, to tell you the truth. This was done with the Scenic Cruiser as well, if you remember. Here's the red stripe variant. Now the red stripe are running down from Portland, Maine to Boston. And lo and behold, one day this shows up. And I am in love all over again. It was called Motor Coach Industries, a Challenger. Challenger not being inappropriately named because they were about to challenge the biggest bus builder in the land. It was an MC5A. And here's a super rare one in the old Detroit Airport Express service. Well, I knew Greyhound had owned and operated a coach building facility in Canada. And this fascinated me that initially I thought it was a Canadian car down here on a charter or something, and then I've seen it showing up everywhere. Now, Motor Coach Industries, or the old Fort Garry Body Works as they were originally called, well, they went back some, I want to tell you. Because here's an imitation 743. Probably one of the most incredibly historic coaches they ever made was their imitation Silverside. Now you remember in World War II, this car held down the Northwest Passage, the old Alcan Highway. This is an absolutely phenomenal little bus in the history of the Greyhound Company. Greyhound in Canada had always been part of the group, but not. Definitely separate. Here's one of those little cars up on the Alaskan Highway back in the early days of World War II. How's that for bussing? This is also available in Greyhound 1 as well. Don't forget, you're looking at Greyhound 2 here. Due to the duties imposed by the Canadian government on American-built buses, the old and Canadian Greyhound had to resort to building buses in Canada. First Fort Garry bus could be traced back as far as 1933. Greyhound of Canada also operated an absolutely incredible fleet of 1940 Cadillac convertibles up at Banff. I could just imagine showing up in an automobile, an old antique automobile meet with one of those big Greyhound dogs on the side of the car. They'd probably lynch you. Greyhound Lines of Canada today has virtually nothing to do with the United States Greyhound Lines, regarding them as a scab operating outfit. As a matter of fact, in Buffalo, they connect with Trailways because they will not connect with Greyhound. And the same with the Pacific Northwest. The MC5 wasn't the first operating Greyhound of that particular style and characteristic. Here's an early car. Here's one of the two that we had at New England Greyhound Lines. These are even earlier than those. These are 95s, Courier 95s. See, the Fort Garry bodyworks would evolve into Courier and then into Challenger and MCI. The early Couriers had a very unique front end as well as rear end, as you can see here. Naturally, survival would dictate that the Fort Garry or the Challenger people would sell to anybody in Canada who wanted to buy one of the coaches. Little did they know when they created this first car, this first series of MCIs, what they would be doing. They just knew that General Motors buses were getting a little less than desirable as far as quality went. And as a matter of fact, they had a horrendous lawsuit against Greyhound for the scenic cruiser. But the MC5s, they came on in quantity. They were good cars. Boy, they're fast cars. They're like 4106s. They had a full-blown engine in there and only 35 feet of bus to push around. MC5s, of course, got up into the Pepsi era, too. This is one I caught at St. Louis many years ago. Here's one in the original livery, breaking the Delaware Memorial Bridge. Blue and white with the red stripe. That's how they initially all came out, at first. Then, of course, came the MC7. Actually, nothing more than a 40-foot MC5, for all practical purposes. MC7s naturally would make it very well into the Pepsi era. As a matter of fact, they haven't been gone that awfully. Well, I suppose they have been gone that length of time now. I don't think they have. I don't feel like they have.